No Good Deed Goes Unpunished by Scrambled Debutant. This all happened in the fall of 1993 when I was 20 years old. In the interest of context, this was before I started going college and I was working in the material prep department of plastics on the night shift. I was the only woman in the department, and my male co-workers were initially skeptical that I could even handle this job. I proved myself and earned their respect. I was working hard, but on the plus side, it also put me into the best shape of my life. On the plus side, I had also just dumped my abusive boyfriend. He was verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive. He was also an alcoholic. This fact, more than anything, is probably why I got myself into this situation. So I'd just gotten off work. It was about 1:30 a.m. My car was running on fumes, so I then stopped at my local gas station to fill it up. While I was pumping gas, a woman about my age approached me looking scared and nervous. She said that she had been at her boyfriend's house and they had a pretty bad fight. She had then walked all the way to the gas station to use the payphone to get her friend to pick her up. On her way to the station, a car pulled up as she was walking and the guys inside started harassing her and catcalling. With a slight movement of her head, she indicated that a car was parked off to the side by the gas station dumpster. It was a large light green car, like a Caddy or Lincoln, with at least 2 or 3 shady guys inside. She said that they had threatened her and she was too scared to go and call her friend and just had to wait. Now the woman was neat and well dressed. She didn't look like she was drunk or high or anything like that. She just seemed really nervous and freaked out. So I didn't even hesitate. I finished pumping my gas and told her to get into my car because I would take her home. At the time, on a weeknight, there's very little traffic, so I booked it right out of the gas station and asked her where she lived. She kept twisting around in the seat to see if there was a car behind us, and when I asked her to put on her seatbelt, she ignored me and kept on looking for the car. I just assumed that she was scared. A few blocks down the road, I had then noticed that she was looking around the car and she started asking me for money. Where's your purse? Where's your bag? I need money. Give me some money. My heart sank then. I have this woman in my car and now she's gonna rob me? But then when I think about it, robbery just didn't make much sense. I was driving a 1985 Chevy and was wearing my work clothes, so it was a ratty t-shirt, jeans and camo boots. So I didn't look like a person with a lot of cash, primarily because I wasn't. She twisted around in the seat again and started yelling, "There they are, there they are." She didn't sound so scared anymore. I checked in the rear view and sure enough, the light green car is right behind me. She started cackling and bouncing up and down in the seat. "My boys are gonna mess you up. You don't know what they're gonna do to you." And she started laughing like she was crazy. She then opened up the glove box and started looking around for stuff, and she was still acting really weird, telling me about how that her guys are planning to mess me up. Now, if I had have been smart, I would have just driven to the police station. Actually, if I had been very smart, I would have just called the cops from the gas station and waited with her until they arrived. That would have been the intelligent thing to do. Unfortunately, none of this crossed my mind until later. In the moment, I got really, really angry. I realized 3 things all at once. There was an intersection up ahead with cars on either side waiting to cross and the light had just turned yellow. I had a spare box cutter that I kept for my work in my driver's side door apartment, and this crazy girl hadn't put her seatbelt on still. I didn't think. I floored it and passed under the yellow light just as it turned red. I glanced back to see if the green car was still behind me, but the cross traffic at the intersection had started to move, and they hadn't caught up yet. The whole time, this crazy girl was still yelling at me. I then slammed on the brakes and she hit the dash and windshield with a solid and viciously satisfying crack. When she then rebounded to the passenger side seat, I got the box cutter up to her face and was screaming some pretty crazy stuff at her. I don't remember exactly what I was saying, but it was along the lines of, "Get out now, get out before I'm gonna cut your face in half, I'm gonna make you eat it." Turns out that acting crazy and using the box cutter was enough to make her want to get out. She then blindly reached for the door handle and tried to pop the door open. I started shoving and punching her until she actually tumbled out of the door to the curb. I then slammed onto the gas and tried to get out there as quick as possible. I had a few more turns before I got to where I wanted to go, and I was very afraid that the green car might actually catch up to me. After a little while though, I had to stop to try and close the passenger door. I then cut across town and got onto the highway to go home. I was on the highway for about 5 minutes before the shake started. I pulled off to the shoulder to calm down and get my stuff together. I then drove home. I told my sister about what had happened, and I mean literally everything. She then wrapped me in a tight bear hug while simultaneously yelling at me for how stupid I was for not going to the police. I have never been so glad to be yelled at in my life. My mum used to clean houses. She quit after this, by Walter Disney. In the mid-80s, my mom was a cleaner in Australia. She would go and clean houses in suburban areas and would sometimes do houses in rural/wine regions. We lived near both at the time. She would leave business cards at local shops and get most of her business that way, and also got some through referrals and word of mouth. So one day my mum gets a call from this lady who sounded like she was around 60, asking my mum to clean her farmhouse. She made a lot of odd demands and my mum would usually meet clients before taking on new business. In this case, the lady didn't want to meet my mum and she said that she would leave the keys under the front doormats. My mum agreed mainly because the lady was quite obviously wealthy and offering to pay my mum substantially more if she would reasonably accept her offer. So my mum went to the house on a Monday morning and she already felt unnerved by the long driveway. The house was essentially in the middle of a very large and very empty property. She found the keys and started cleaning it though. About an hour into the clean, she hears the back door shut. My mum was told that nobody would be in the house, so she immediately felt unsafe. She stood frozen in the kitchen for what felt like 3 or 4 minutes, although it could have been much longer apparently. There was no other cars on the property. She wanted to leave immediately but had 2 more rooms left to do. Both were only bedrooms. So after a while of waiting, she didn't hear anything else, so she decided that perhaps it was just nothing, or perhaps something had fallen and it wasn't actually the door after all. So she then walked up the hallway and stepped into the bedroom. All over the bed were black and white photos. As my mum got closer, she realised that every picture was one of her. Some were taken at our family home, and many were taken at other people's houses that my mum would clean. Some were through windows or over fences. She used the house phone to call the police and immediately driven to the end of the driveway for her own protection. The lady ended up being investigated, but she continued to claim that it was a break-in. After some time, the police decided to stop investigating, and we ended up moving to a new town about 4 months later. Get Ready to Die, Little Kid by Salty Popcorn 2. This happened just under 2 years ago, in June/July during 2015. Bored, with nothing else to do, my friends and I decided to go on one of those pop-up fairs. They come up about once every year for about a week. It was really small, with only a couple of rides that we actually wanted to go on. One of which was a ride where you stand up, get strapped in and hold onto the metal bars at either side of you. It then spins in a circle. Now, I had never been on one of those rides before, so I really wanted the opportunity to go on it, so I paid my money and waited at the ramp for one of my friends, we'll just call her Lucy, to go and pay and come with me. However, as she got to the front of the queue, she suddenly stepped to the side and shouted to me, "Hey, I've got a really weird feeling. I'm going on the waters." Confused, I obligated and nodded okay, and go and head up onto the ride by myself. Sure, I was confused, but definitely not phased. So I then go and stand to where the ride assistant tells me to, and I wait. It then starts to fill up, and three boys around 6 or 7 years older than me, I was 12 at the time, stand next to me, with two at one side and one on another. Weird, I thought. There were multiple places where they could have gone and stood together. The boys then start messing around with their seatbelts. Eventually, one of them manages to take it off. He nudges me. "See that, kid? It's off." And then proceeds to do a really creepy laugh like you'd see in the movies. Truly creeped out, I just stood there, not reacting to his gesture, and trying not to think about his potential intentions. He then starts fiddling with my seatbelt. I lean away from him, idiotically thinking that this will bring the seatbelt out of his reach. Of course, it stayed exactly where it is. He then looks up at me, smiles, and says, ah, as if to say, keep still. Again, I didn't react, I just stood there, until I actually felt my seatbelt sliding against my skin. He had managed to take it off. In a mad scramble, putting toggles and pushing fabric against fabric, I locked my seatbelt back in place again. It really isn't a strong seatbelt, it could easily break. These thoughts rushed through my head. I was distracted by the seatbelt remover person. You know, there really won't be enough time for you to put your seatbelt back on when you're spinning round, right? Possibly falling into the motors. He laughed again. "Get ready to die, little kid." At the same time as saying the last sentence, he began unbuckling my seatbelt once again. I presumed, as most of you reading this will, he was having some weird joke. That was until I stared up at him, his lanky body towering over mine, his vacant eyes staring at my chubby, stocky physique. I then helped him on his mission to unclick my belt. Click. I run to the exit of the ride, intending to reenact a scene of the Olympic hurdles. Of course, it's much harder than it looks to hurdle, so I do the ever classic, one leg over and the other leg on the other side roll over the gate. I was free. I caught up with my friends on the water car and hopped onto it with them before it started spinning. It wasn't until I told them what happened when I realised what could have actually happened if my seatbelt was taken off. The ride, I had seen from watching in the queue and from the fair, wasn't really going fast enough to provide the force you need to keep at the edge. If I had fallen down towards the centre of the ride, I would have almost definitely been thrown into the mechanics. The protective fence that they had was only waist high, so there was no way that I would have been able to not flip over that fence. I truly believe that had he have unbuckled my seatbelt and I continued to ride, he would have almost definitely killed me. He really seemed insane. Oh mate, my new mic sound just come and I'm proper hyped up for this story now. It's so much better than my last one. Our Family Stalker by Lil Mouse Fufu. On October 2016, a longtime family friend began harassing my family. So I've known this guy since I was around 5. He worked at my dad's friend's car dealership. He was basically the guy who maintains the exteriors of the cars. My parents became fond of him because he looked so sweet, but they rather rapidly felt pity for him because he had such horrible hygiene habits. They'd often buy food for him, gift him clothes, and things of that sort. Anyway, around 2015, this man gets a job right around the street from my mum's job. He saw my mum one morning and they just waved at each other. This man then starts calling my mum frequently. Now, my mum is extremely nice. Too nice. So instead of just not picking up, she would always talk to him. This guy then becomes obsessed with my mum to the point that she has to tell him to stop contacting her. And this goes well. Surprisingly, he actually stopped contacting my mum. So months later, he began to watch my mum. I mean literally, he will park his car in front of my mum's job and watch her. She even notices him, but she never saw it as a huge threat, so she never actually said anything. That's where things escalate. My mum was walking out of work with a co-worker one day. It was just a normal worker relationship. My mum catches a ride with the co-worker to a mandatory work event, so then she wouldn't have to drive home too late as these events usually end pretty late. Meanwhile, this guy is watching them walk to his car. He suddenly thinks that my mum is having an affair with this guy and decides to follow them. So eventually they did arrive at this place, and my mum decides to stay in her car while the co-worker goes inside to check if it's the right location. The stalker then walks up to the car, opens the door, slaps my mum, grabs a knife from his car, and slashes all of the tyres. Now, my mum's in complete shock. She immediately calls her co-worker to come outside. So after he comes outside, there's no sight of the guy. For some reason, her co-worker didn't decide to press any charges against him. He could have easily done so, and there were cameras outside this location. Now, my mum mentions none of this to my dad because he is really explosive, to the point that, realistically, he's probably going to get in trouble over this guy. So, everything is okay for a couple of days. But then, this guy starts calling my mum non-stop and leaving her threatening voicemails. The voicemails... the voicemails... The voicemail said something along the lines of, "If you don't meet up at a hotel on Wednesday at 1 PM, I'm gonna tell your husband that you're cheating on him." Now, this does in fact scare my mum a lot because my dad has a past with domestic violence, so she's scared my dad will believe him and beat her. So anyway, eventually Wednesday rolls around, and my mum gets out of her car and goes to work. As she does so, he's waiting outside. He literally waits there the whole day and watches her. She then calls my grandpa, who is an ex-military and ex-judoka, and not really a guy to play with. They immediately drive to my mum's job, but this guy starts harassing my grandparents, and he won't leave my mum's job. 1 PM comes around and my mum decides to call the cops. The dude then hauls across the streets and hides. He leaves his car at my mum's job, so the police then went to search for him and he's nowhere to be found. The phone calls continue and things only escalate. This man decides to vandalize my mum's car. He throws tar all over my mum's car while the car is parked outside. The car is basically destroyed at this point, and my parents have to pay a lot of money to try and fix it. Now at this point, my dad knows of the whole ordeal, and he's set on killing this guy. We tried to get my dad to calm down because my mum was just about to take out a restraining order. He then continues calling and stands outside my mum's job every day. This man starts driving to my house every day and begins to see me as a target. He leaves my mum threatening voicemails all the time, saying how he's going to vandalize my car. So at this point, I'm even more terrified. At this point in the story, my mum has had to call the cops on several occasions, but the cops say that they can't do anything because he's not physically attacked her. My mum decides then that she's going to finally petition for the restraining order, with the police reports and voicemails as evidence. So they set up a court date and give my mum a temporary restraining order until the court date is due, so approximately 2 weeks. However, this guy does not stop calling my mum, so my mum calls a detective in charge of her case, and this guy hasn't been served with the restraining order just yet. He was notified with the court date though, so he tells my mum that he has proof that she won't stop being called by him now. He then starts threatening the rest of us. I wake up one Saturday morning and my car has letters drawn all over the windows in nail polish. Luckily, we were able to gently scrape it off, but by now I am a nervous wreck. I start doing bad in my classes and I hadn't slept for about a month. He then begins to harass my dad with voicemails and phone calls, but luckily my dad didn't have any of this. So anyway, eventually the court date does roll around. This man shows up with his stepson, and his stepson starts talking crap about my mum, because of course he only knows this man's side of the story. The judge then does finally call him in and does the usual questioning, talking about the police reports, etc. The judge then asks him if he has anything to say or show, and he says, "Yes, I have the phone bill that shows that she called me more than 200 times this month." The judge says, "Alright, show me." Guess what? He didn't bring anything. There's no such thing. The judge nods her head and says, "Okay, I reached a verdict." He was found guilty and my mom was awarded a restraining order for life. We finally have peace in our family once again. Crazy lady hates teenagers. Ma'am, I'm 20, by Nan the Cow Dog. I live in a small town and work in Town. I get off of work last night at around 10:30, and at the time I was feeling pretty okay because I didn't have to work Easter. I was planning to go to Walmart, but I wanted to get gas from a closer gas station because I had their rewards card. Now, living in a small town, there's not much to do around here, especially if you're aged between 15 and 20. So going back at the last 3 generations, teens in this town, which I always call my hometown, spend their Friday and Saturday nights driving from AutoZone down 3/3 about 5 blocks, turning onto the South Main, driving 2 blocks, turning around in the pawn shop and driving back the very same way. I know that's boring, but there really isn't much to do that isn't illegal. So I went in and paid for my gas and noticed that there was a woman standing in the corner glaring out from the front of the gas station. I didn't think much about it, so I just headed back outside. The night was so nice, so the drag was filled with a few cars, and the AutoZone across the street was still filled with parked cars of people who were about my age. There was also a pickup full of high school boys across from me who were all minding their own business, getting gas and snacks. Suddenly, my mood is interrupted by the same angry woman who was in the store. She literally starts screaming in my face. I'm sure that she actually got some spit on me. "Get your ass home. I'm tired of all of you kids driving round at night. Get out of here," she screams, loud enough for the rowdy guys in the pickup next to me to go quiet. She then also said that I needed to stop having sex. I am a virgin. She keeps on yelling at me about how disrespectful that us teenagers are, and since I had just gotten off work, I was still kind of brain dead and just blanked out until I heard my gas pump ticking off. And the lady was still screaming in my face. $13 of gas later, in fact. She had worked herself into a sweat. She was breathing heavily, and as a somewhat overweight person myself, I could tell that she was having a very hard time, as it was thanks to her size. My mouth was just still there wide open. I pulled the pump out of my tank. I mustered up the only reason I could think of. Ma'am, I'm 20. I am just getting off work and I'm getting gas. Somehow. this crazy woman gets angrier and tries to step forward, and she's already too close when the boys in the pickup started laughing. "Hey lady, I'm 17, the driver yells. All of the other boys in the pickup then get out and start yelling about their age too. Crazy lady, now having multiple targets who are younger than me, goes to chase them. The boys are screaming and laughing as this 60-year-old lady chases them around the truck. I thought, screw this, and climbed back into my own. The driver of the truck, the only one who was still in the truck, looks at me as if to say, now what? So I mentioned to him that he should move on. He honks and yells for his friends to jump in the bed. 3 of them made it in, except for the one bigger kid, who I think said that he was 16, while the other guys just told her to go away. She then started to claw his arm with one hand, trying to push him to the ground with the other. Out of all the times for the cops not to be driving around, this was one of them. I then climbed out of my truck, mumbling to myself, no, 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 thinking that I was gonna have to save a kid who wasn't exactly much younger than me from being killed by this crazy woman. Thank God the people from across the street saw, because they noticed and started laughing and screaming at this crazy woman. She then lets go of the 16-year-old and starts hobbling to the curb. The 16-year-old started to scramble, and I, already being tall, built and fitted with adrenaline, checked him quickly before throwing him into the cab with the drivers and telling him to leave now in my best mum voice. The driver nods and the other boys are still scrambling about the crazy woman, with the 16-year-old just nodding and holding back tears. He then peels off and is gone. I climbed into my pickup truck because I see the crazy lady is coming back, and I start it and drive up around her, telling her to go away. I decided to go on the drag, mostly because I didn't want to see this woman again. I drove off and went on to the drag 2 more times, and seen the crazy lady still on the corner of the gas station with her arms crossed, flipping off every teenager who went by. I go past a 3rd time and she's gone. I'm wondering if she went home or worse. I went to one of the parking lots where the people parked to harass some more people. It was the latter. There she was in the AutoZone parking lot screaming at some girl before a guy got in between them. I stopped and watched. I was happy to see that they seemed to be able to handle it. I mean, they were just harassing her back, but there was a guy who had a repurposed scooter cart and he kept driving in circles around her. I drove off, and when it was getting late and time for the curfew, I pulled over and talked to the group and the guy on the scooter. Apparently, she had enough and just went off into the darkness behind the gas station. I pointed out that the houses behind the store are well known for meth heads, and she was more than likely on something. I ended up hanging out with them for the rest of the night. They were pretty chill. The scooter guy was hilarious. Now, I've never seen those guys in the truck again or heard from them. I just went home that night, and I hope that that 16-year-old wasn't too scared. Stranger Under the Bed by Myra. I am a 22-year-old, and this incident happened a year and a half ago. I had just moved into my first apartment and was in the process of moving in. The door that led into my apartment locked itself automatically when closed, so I was going to the entrance of the apartment complex to get my mail while on the phone to my boyfriend. I returned to the apartment and sat on my bed while opening the mail, using my phone simultaneously. I dropped the phone on the floor and it landed under the bed, so I had to lie on the floor to look for it. I then saw something that caught my eye. There was someone under the bed. My eyes widened. I choked the urge to scream. The person under the bed was actually facing away from me, so I could see his back, with his chest facing the opposite way. I couldn't see his face, and he didn't see me. Trying to be rational while so many thoughts rushed through my head, I picked up the phone and said, "Sorry, I dropped my phone. I'm gonna have a shower and call you right back." I then hung up. The bathroom is right by my bed, so I hesitantly walked in, quietly locking the door, turning on the shower, then jumping out of my window and calling the cops. They told me to wait nearby, but to wait across the building so that I was in a position where I could see if anybody comes out to the door of the apartment complex. This was during summer and it was still light out. I placed myself across the street, hiding behind a car while hatching my bathroom window open to the entry door. I called my boyfriend and he came to get me just before the police arrived. I gave them my keys and they went inside. Only moments later, two cops come out holding a thin and tired looking man. He was looking really crazy, like really off. He didn't try and escape. The police that had stood beside me and confronted me while the police were searching through my house told me that the man stood outside my bathroom door with one of my kitchen knives waiting for me to return. This man had somehow crept in through my entry door while I was getting the mail and then hid under my bed. The man was trying to hurt me. It turned out that he was actually homeless but was then placed into a mental hospital. My boyfriend moved in with me the very next day. The Ice Cream Man by Trex Pizza Party. Growing up, I lived in a decent sized middle class apartment complex. Now all of this took place during 1988 to 1990. This means that I was about 4 or 5 during these events. Since there was only one driveway in and out of my complex, my mom pretty much let me roam around by myself from a very young age. My court or block was the first one that you passed after entering the apartment complex. I wasn't supposed to leave this without letting my mom know exactly where I was going to. Now, I was a very curious and social child. My mom actually called me the mayor because I knew so many people in the complex. I had overall a few run-ins with creeps and weirdos, and definite pedos over the 2 years that I was living there, but nothing had ever escalated into any sort of worrisome incidents. My parents were both pretty tough growing up, and educated on really street smart stuff and self-defense, so it was only natural that I also learnt this, and that it's also okay to talk to strangers in certain situations because not everybody's bad, and they also told me how to tell when somebody might be a danger. At one point, we did have this particularly ugly, creepy ice cream man. He had a Billy Ray Cyrus type mullet. He wore spiky tank tops and had really bad acne. He was also really weird and had bad teeth and a weird nose. At this time I considered him in his 40s, but looking back on it, he was probably only in his late teens or early 20s. He loved talking to the other kids about wrestling. I went to his truck once, along with friends, and he was parked outside the pool. I didn't have enough money for something, so I said, "Oh, never mind," but he still gave it to me anyway for whatever money I did have. I didn't like the way he was too friendly and smiled at me too much, so if I heard the ice cream man, I'd peek out of the window to see where the guy was, and I always didn't get ice cream if I knew it was him. I didn't know how much time had passed between my first encounter with him and the last, but in between there were a few occasions where I was coming home or going to a different court for whatever reason, and as if I happened to be walking down the main drive, he would almost always pull up next to me like he was going to do ice cream on the sidewalk, and I'd just pretend that he wasn't there and cut through a court and hide. He would then holler things like, "Why are you scared of me? I'm nice, you're making me feel bad." Anyway, one day my mom said that I couldn't leave the courts for whatever reason. My friend lived in the corner apartment of the court after mine, so I sat on my court nearest to hers and she sat on the corner. We were talking about tossing toys to each other and across a parking lot and whatnot. I then heard the ice cream man mid-conversation. Even though I was at the other end of my block, he saw me when he pulled in. He then started driving towards me and I just ran and hid in my court till he moved further into the complex. I waited for what felt like an eternity until I didn't hear the music anymore. So I got up and walked back around the corner to my friend, but she had already gone inside. I picked up whatever toy I'd left behind as I turned to start going home. I then noticed that he's just sitting in the parking lot of the court across the main drive in his truck with the music off. I dropped what I was holding and go to pick it back up, and he's already directly across the street from me at this point, and he stopped. "Hi, what's your name? Can we be friends? I feel really bad that I scared you. I'm a really nice guy." He had on some tank top and his hair was really greasy and his acne was really flared up. I remember just being so repulsed by him. My legs locked up because I was so scared, and mentally I was trying to decide if I'd have a better chance escaping through the woods or take a chance down the main drive. "I can't have friends," my mom said, so, "Well, let me give you free ice cream. I feel bad." "My mom says I can't have ice cream." "Okay, you can have a candy or soda or snap bracelet." "Sorry, I can't cross the street. It's okay." "That's okay, I'll come over to you. You can ride in the truck and play the music if you want." I then realised that this back and forth was a losing battle for me, so I decided that the best thing I could do now was just to play along. "Okay, if you turn the truck around, I don't have to cross the street so my mom won't get mad." He'd then have to leave and immediately re-enter the complex to do that, and it would buy me about 20 or 30 seconds. He got way too excited that I seemed willing and he started driving, and I immediately took off running. I got home and my mom was on the phone with my dad, who was out of the state for that day. I told her exactly what happened and she made me tell my dad, and they said how proud they were of me and how I'd made really grown-up decisions. After that, unless I was out of town, I avoided all ice cream men at all costs. I still think about it to this day though, and I always tell this story to my kids that I babysit. I just hope that I was the one kid that he tried to bait, and there's no one else that had to experience what I did, because he's probably done a lot worse. The Maintenance Man by Lord Pumpkin. Tensions were high around our apartment complex when I was around 10. In a month's time, we had a man that committed suicide in the unit. We had a partial fire in the building that actually led to reconstruction, and there was a child that had been hit by a car who later survived. Even at such a young age, I still remembered having a pretty good grasp on what was actually going on. It had to be around the spring of 1997. My mother was single and raising my little sister, who was about 5 years older than I. She managed a different complex and would pick up us from school and drop us off at our apartment while she returned to work for a couple more hours. I also had three older siblings, but all of them had moved out, and at some point during their lives, they had to keep an eye on the two younger siblings. There was no money for a sitter, so the oldest just had to assume the role, and that was me at the time. For the most part, we were really quiet kids in our second or third story unit. We played with our toys, watched a little television, and sometimes played Saga on Nintendo. On this particular afternoon, I recall playing with a Dash Randa figure from Star Wars, while that my sister was doing whatever in the same living room. Suddenly, the doorknob started to shake violently. Now my heart dropped and I remembered that it was the first time I ever felt true terror. I rushed to the phone and paid my mum, and she dialed 911 to let the operator know that somebody was breaking in. I then got passed to the 911 operator, and they assured me that help was on the way. The door handle was still being messed around with, but I was still nervous that if I had deadbolted the door, it still wouldn't be enough. I was waiting there anxiously, and then there was some really loud bangs going on. It was almost as if somebody was ramming themselves against the door with their shoulder. Then it all stopped. The cops arrived shortly before my mum, only to find a note from the maintenance guy saying something like, "Air filter, check." Now, the maintenance guy claimed that he had announced himself verbally, but I knew that it was a lie. And of course, the cops did nothing, and my mum's complaint to the officers didn't yield much in this man being fired. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the most unnerving part of my story. My mum said that the guy would just stare her down in the parking lot just to smile at her. The whole situation creeped all of us out and we wanted to move, but we just couldn't afford the expenses. One night, a couple of weeks later, I was awoken by a loud thud coming from the roof. Being so easily rattled from the previous event, I ran to my mum's room to wake her up. She checked around to make sure that everything was in place and reassured me that it was probably just a rodent. So I just assumed that it was nothing and decided to go to sleep. We went to school the next morning and we got dropped off at home like usual in the afternoon. My mum did a quick sweep of the place even before the attempted break-in, but this time something seemed very off. It was just very uneasy when we entered the apartment, and just as we walked in, my sister and I were ordered to stay downstairs by the front door while she went upstairs to investigate. We both waited there patiently, scared, and eventually my mother's screams confirmed our suspicions. She came barreling down the stairs and ushered us out of the door. We went to her neighbours and phoned the police. She was going crazy, screaming that there's somebody in our apartment. The police responded pretty quickly and I was finally able to understand the situation. There was a walk-in closet that had a hatch that actually led straight up to the attic, and that was connected to the entire building's aircon/heat system. The shelves were pretty high, uplining the walls, and my mother walked in to find a dirty pair of men's tighty whities laying in the floor. This was enough to send her running for the phone to get the police. However, the investigation revealed something even more disturbing. The attic hatch had actually been disturbed. Just to add, the police had found full handprints on the shelves in the closet. The noises I heard the previous night were more than likely this man hoisting himself up and down into the crawl space using the shelves to climb. Shortly after, the guy got taken in for sentencing. I'm not sure exactly what he ended up getting. It just terrifies me to think that this guy was actually living there and he could have done anything to us. I think I saved the girl last night by Zombies Lerp. Yesterday I had a crappy day and was required to work a lot of extra hours. We had just changed our time zone 1 hour, so it was already dark when I left my workplace. I was pretty stressed and was just driving home like usual. I then noticed that there was this girl on a dark street just texting. I think that she was waiting for the light to change. I was thinking that this is a pretty bad place to be just sitting there texting in the dark. That's when I turned and noticed that there was a guy like 50 feet away from her. He was just staring. I was about to go on my usual way, but I then noticed that he was just eating her with his eyes. It then suddenly hit me that this was a really bad situation. Oh crap. I go and park my car right next to the street where she was before. Just as I turn the corner, I notice that she's pushing him and forcing him away while screaming. I sprint as fast as I can and scream, "Hey, leave her alone." The guy turned and saw me. He then pushed her aside and ran like crazy. I then started to chase him and noticed that He's dropped a knife in the streets while running. I then turned back to ask the girl if she was okay, and she was, and calmed down a bit. She told me that her phone got stolen, and she told me that it was just a value and it didn't matter that much. She was waiting for her boyfriend, so when he arrived I explained the situation. I shook hands with him and left. Night Vision by Whitney Cat. It was the summer before my senior year in college. My little brother always had interest in military stuff. He had actually gotten himself a pair of night vision goggles for his birthday, and he had then left them at my apartment. One night, I was bored and decided to go and try out the goggles at a wooded hiking area / nature reserve nearby. In retrospect, this seems like a really stupid idea since I was all by myself and I'm a female, but I was young and stupid, and I got myself all excited at the possibility of seeing deer and other woodland creatures in their natural habitats during night time. I was familiar with these woods. My best friend and I had hiked there at night before, and we'd never run into anybody else. For the most part, it's just rural and pretty safe, so I didn't anticipate any trouble. I parked in the little sparsely lit car park, ignored the sign that said park closes at 10, and entered the woods. I had my night vision goggles in hand. It was a half moon that night, and that was the only light that filtered down through the canopy of the trees. It was pretty dark, and I didn't want to put on my goggles until I'd found a place to sit down, so I lit my way with the mini mag lights on my keychain. I had a couple of times that I thought that I heard a slight rustling in the woods in the distance, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, so I put it down to just animal activity, hoping that maybe it was a deer and I'd actually be able to see one. After I'd hiked in a fair distance, I found a fallen log that I could just sit on to try the goggles out. I don't know if you've ever used them before, but the effect is impressive to say the least. They can turn near pitch black darkness into bright as day scenery. Everything appears in shades of green, but they're still quite bright and clear. For a while, I really had a blast looking around from my fallen log vantage point. Some chipmunks played around in the leaves nearby, and there was a big owl that was illuminated by its eyes from a tree branch. Still no deers though, and I started to think that maybe I wouldn't be likely to see them anywhere. I sat right out there in an open log waiting, so I eventually decided that I should maybe look for a place that was a little more hidden. I made my way a little deeper into the woods then, finally finding a huge tree that was perfect for climbing. Now, I've always loved climbing trees, so it was nothing for me to hoist myself up a few branches and settle in and wait for deer. I really didn't see any though. What I did see though, lit up in bright green night vision tint after about 10 minutes of waiting, was this. There was a guy who was dressed in all black. He was literally in all black from head to toe. He was making his way stealthily through the woods. He was literally going in the same direction that I had come from, and was clearly trying to stay hidden, moving from tree to tree and glancing around carefully before making his move. It looked very much like he was looking for someone. Now, it took me a few moments to notice that he was carrying something, and when I saw what it was, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This guy had a big knife on him, a real big one. He was gripping it as if he expected to use it in the very near future. It wasn't deer hunting season either, and this is a nature preserve where hunting of any kind is completely prohibited. Now, at any rate, the guy was alone and not dressed like a hunter, and there were no deers in sight. Very few hunters kill their prey with their knives. I was suddenly in a very horrible situation. I was a young woman who was alone, weaponless, in the middle of the woods at night. Now, this was also the 90s, so there was no cell phones. Even if I had one, I wouldn't have felt safe using it, least to draw any attention to me. Now, I didn't know how he was able to see so well in the dark. I guess that his eyes had just adjusted. I was terrified that he was going to look up and spot me, so I sat there, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. I then continued to watch as he carried out his stealthy process of scanning the forest for who or whatever the hell he was stalking. I scanned around but literally couldn't see anyone, even from my high vantage point, and the sickening thought struck me that I might be his target. I then thought further back and realized that maybe the rustling sound that I heard initially was actually him. Then I thought back even further and realized that there was actually a white car that had followed too close behind me for most of my drive to the nature preserve. Now at the time I just thought, oh, this is annoying, but eventually I turned into the nature reserve car park and he didn't follow me any further and the white car just passed on its way, and I never thought anything of it. Why would I? Now, I was horrified though. If this was the car of that driver, he'd literally circled back and seen my car parked in the lot alone. It was obvious that if this was the case, then it would mean that he had come in after me. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, and watched for what felt like an eternity. It was probably even half an hour or so. There was a heart-stopping moment when he paused right underneath my tree, and I'm sure he was going to look up and find me, but he didn't. After a while, he seemed to give up for whatever reason, and I heard him say screw it. He then started heading back in the direction he'd come from. That's the direction of the parking area. I stayed in that tree, wet with sweat and crying, until eventually the sun came up a few hours later. Then I climbed down and I was still terrified, gripping the little can of pepper spray on my keychain. I made my way to the parking lot as fast as I possibly could. When I got there, the guy had been there. My windshield had been smashed with a rock, and somebody had scraped all down the sides of the car with something sharp. Upon closer inspection, it was clear that obviously he had done it with his knife. I just thank God that that knife didn't end up sticking into me. I thank God for the night vision goggles that let me see him before he could see me, and I also thank God for the big trees with the sturdy branches. The most scary part is, had he actually found me at any point, I would have been helpless and he could have done whatever he wanted with people not around for literally miles. I would be completely helpless had anything happened, purely at his mercy. That Creepy Neighbor Kid by Catastrophic Headache. This takes place several years ago during the summer when my kid was 4 or 5 years old. We own a condo in what can only be described as the White Ghetto. Most of the houses here are multi-family units, and they were built as an effort to gentrify and clean up the area. Anyway, the people here are not that bad. There is a lot of heroin use going on here, lots of house fires, but for the most part, it's relatively quiet. The unit that I live in houses 5 other families. My son and I spent most of the summer out in the backyard, and I never, ever left him unattended. I have always been careful and aware as I was sexually abused by a neighbor growing up. I trust no one. So anyway, one day, a boy showed up in our backyard. He was with one of the older neighbor kids called Brandon. His name was Max. Max was probably 11 or 12 years old, and instead of just sticking with Brandon and the older kids, he would always take up with the toddlers. That didn't ring alarm bells with me. When I was 11, my best friend was 5, but that was only because there were no other kids my age in the area, so I didn't think it was odd. But being the vigilant mother that I was, I decided that I was going to keep an eye out on Max, who seemed to take a liking to my son. They played together every day for several weeks. I would talk to Max, who was really down on himself. He told me, "My mum says I won't amount to much." I felt bad for the kid and told him that if he ever worked hard and kept out of trouble and got a good education, he could do things he dreamed of. He was a really charming kid, but It just always seemed to me that he was trying too hard to butter me up. He would constantly offer to watch over my son. If you guys take a nap, or anything, if you have things to do, I can watch on him for you. I always declined. Max would also offer to walk my son over to the ice cream truck when it come round the corner and ask me to let him take my son over for a walk anyway. He would always act like he was dejected and try to make me feel bad for not trusting him. No, no, no. I had never left my son alone with Max, and then one day, as suddenly as he appeared, he disappeared. One day, as summer began to fade into fall, I sat outside with Brandon's mother. "So did you hear about Max?" Of course she didn't. It turns out that Max took his 2-year-old cousin out into the woods for a walk. When they were found, the 2-year-old was no longer wearing his diaper and was clearly engaged in inappropriate behaviours. I am so glad I never fell for Max's antics and didn't let him guilt me into time with my son. I don't know what I would have done if my son had ever got harmed. Creepy Weird Face Guy by Notatro87. A few years ago, in November-ish of 2013, I was assigned to Fort Jackson. Now, as a New Englander, I was pretty thrilled with the slower pace of life off post in South California, and I met super friendly people practically everywhere that I went. I missed my motorcycle back home, so I snagged one down there off Craigslist with the intent of shipping it back up north at the end of my temporary duty, and then trading it in for something bigger and better that I could use for longer rides than my little guy back home. That's a 1975 Honda 125cc. Anyway, I didn't know that I had to take some silly military motorcycle course, and this was back during the government shutdown when Jackson cancelled all of theirs, so my instructor demanded that I find a post offering the course and take it on a military installation. Fortunately, I found another installation that offered the course at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, which isn't too far away, maybe like 2 or 3 hours. I only had a little sedan, but my buddy swapped cars with me for a few days, and he then helped me load the bike onto his Toyota pickup truck, and that wasn't too hard because it was just a little Honda 250. Not wanting to be late, I left for Bragg at some ungodly hour at like maybe 3 AM. My GPS took me through back roads along open fields. The drive was peaceful and the roads were quiet. I was so excited because just a year before I had been searching for jobs back home with my crappy little economy car and no money. After joining the army, I was able to buy a nice car, get a little motorcycle, and go to parts of the country that I'd never been. If a year before that, you ever told me that I would be in Carolina driving a pickup truck with my motorcycle around at 3 AM, it would have been a huge shock to me. Anyway, I felt a great deal of pride and excitement and was a little high on life, corny as that is. Being in this new nice pickup truck, it was easy to want to barrel through these nice long straight desolate roads, but I kept it slow and steady so to not get pulled over. Eventually, I came up behind this beat up little American car. Maybe it was like a Ford Fiesta thing, I don't know. It was purple and had one person in the vehicle, just a driver. He was going really slowly, maybe 30 miles per hour, which was painful, but I stayed a safe distance away from him. So I was in no hurry and had plenty of time, so it was a nice drive and it was slow for a while though. Then, the guy suddenly goes to like 70 maybe, and that seemed a little too quick for these roads. Stupidly, I thought that maybe this guy was an old pro who knew that there were cops here, so I stayed with him, slowing down and speeding up like he did, but I stayed way back not to elevate any suspicion of him, and everybody hates it when trucks go really close behind you. So yeah, I know that seemed really creepy, and I was stuck with this guy at like 4 in the morning in the middle of nowhere, but I guess I didn't think about it. Besides, At the time, I was 26, a girl with longish, dirty blonde hair who wore makeup and looked completely harmless. Who in their right mind would ever be afraid of me? Eventually, this guy pulled off to the side of the road, and that's when things started getting weird. It was largely my fault for assuming that everybody in the South was friendly and a heartbeat away from offering me some sweet tea. Like someone. Maybe he had car trouble and I wanted to check on him to see if he was okay. I rolled down the window, leaned over to the passenger side so he could see how non-threatening I am, and I said something like, "Good morning, sir. Are you okay? I wanted to check on you and that you're not just leaving here if you're having car trouble. I have a phone and if you need an AAA." At this point, it was very clear that I'm just a youngish, blondish female and was probably harmless, and the weirdo goes, "I was doing just fine myself until I saw you following me." You know, in some slow southern drawl, white guy, maybe 50, heavy, unshaven but not bearded. He looked unkempt in general. He was ugly and, in some odd hills of eyes sort of thing, he was lumpy slash asymmetrical. Anyway, I felt bad that I had given him such a fright, so I tried to explain that I thought he knew that the cops were here, and that's why it seemed like I was following him and that I was sorry. Then I asked him for directions to brag because my GPS wasn't working, and I really wasn't sure where I was. At this point, I wasn't scared because I was in some huge truck, and he was just off at the side of the road. The guy basically started screaming at me, calling me every bad name under the sun, and something totally strange, and I didn't get what he was going on about. I was completely startled, so I said, "Oh, crap," and for some reason rolled up the window before shifting into drive, and he screamed, "I ain't letting no goddamn woman swear in front of me. I'ma put the fear of God into you." I couldn't hear the rest. The window was shutting right at the same time he said God. It was literally like some huge what the hell moment. It was so weird. Before I can put the truck into drive, he tries to jump out and literally grabs my passenger side door. As I'm shifting into drive, he is pounding on the window with his terrifying looking face. It took me an extra second because I wasn't used to where the shift was on this new truck. That kinda scared me a bit, and for a second I had to pause stupidly, and I then looked at his face because I almost couldn't believe it. I'll never forget it. He had these crazy beady eyes and this wild look in his face. He looked really mental. He was literally screaming and spitting all over the window. It was like he had suddenly slipped into some crazy, frenzied rage. It was the scariest, angriest face I've ever seen. I literally just floored it out of there and completely freaked out. Sometimes I still dream about that guy. I really don't ever want to see him again. 4 a.m. car cleaning by AJ Redden-Akulis. I felt I had to share this encounter because honestly, I never thought that I would ever experience anything like this myself. So here's some quick background information leading up to the night in question. I am graduating from university tomorrow, so I was determined to get an early night. I'd gone round to my friends for a wee spiff, but I didn't do any wrong. I'm not a pothead, it was more of a celebration. Anyway, I remembered that I had to take my mum to hospital. Nothing serious, but she had to be taken and picked up. Then I remembered we'd rolled the joint in the car. Disaster, she'd smell it everywhere, so I made a mental note to stop and vacuum the car. We have a 24-hour petrol station really close to us. This is kind of off on its own though, if that makes sense. There's no houses or buildings surrounding it. I then pull in and look over the shop. They use a hatch after 12 and don't allow you inside, but I don't need anything. It had just ticked over 4 a.m. and I had to be up at 10, so I just wanted to get this done and get out of here. The vacuum machine was behind the coal shed, but It was very well lit. I cranked on some music on my phone and got to work. It was £1 for 4 minutes of vacuuming, so not that bad, I thought. There was nobody else there in the lot other than me and one white van, but the guy inside was yelling wildly into his phone. Not loudly, I guess, just making a lot of gestures. I felt for him though, probably because this guy had been driving all night, but hey, I crack on with the work at hand. I then look over and I caught his eye. He looked away and I laughed. Love at first sight, I said to myself. I was in an amazing mood. Then things started to get weird. The summer sun was already starting to rise and the streetlights went out, including those illuminating the petrol station. It wasn't that dark, but it was noticeably creepier and I was keen to really get a move on. I then stared over towards the van, but it was noticeably creepier and I was keen to really get my move on. I stared over at him and the guy was watching me. He was still talking on his phone, but then something really weird happened. This began to make me really freak out. I saw somebody lean forward from the other seat and peek around the guy, then immediately slam themselves back against the seat. That's when I then realized that the guy on the phone was in the passenger seat and wasn't actually driving. I hadn't noticed it when I drove in, but I just shrugged it off and set the vacuum cleaner back, ready to leave. I threw all of my stuff back into my car and went to unlock the door when a voice said, "Excuse me." I swear I nearly had a heart attack. My heart was absolutely pounding, but I did recognize the voice. The petrol station was a Spar, the small chain of stores I work in, and the guy who'd spoken was my old supervisor. He had moved to a 24-hour store not that long ago. He began to shout at me for using the vacuum so late at night, and the two guys in the van just sat there watching us, waiting for him to go away. Then he said something that made the whole situation get a lot more real. "I'm gonna have to ask you to come inside." We weren't allowed to let customers in past 11, even in the stores open until 12. This is a big no-no, especially as I knew I wasn't doing anything wrong. I then allowed him to lead me into the store, and he took me inside and put down all of the shutters instantly. He told me that he'd been watching the guys in the van. They'd been sitting there for nearly 3 hours. Little did I know, my old supervisor saw somebody get out of the back of the van, as he described it, then put a bit of masking tape across a few zeros on their number plate, effectively creating a new one. I began to panic. Looking outside, I then noticed that the van was gone. After checking the CCTV, it was shown that they sped away the minute I was taken inside the store. We then called the police pretty much immediately after, and they examined what little footage there was immediately. They took the tape and thanked us for bringing it to their attention. Now at one point on the CCTV, the guy who got out of the back of the van turned back into it, but as he's doing so, you can see that he has a knife in his hand. I realize this sounds a bit dramatic, but God knows what would have happened to me if my old supervisor hadn't been looking out for me. Always Trust My Gut by Manda8605. I went to a college in a town with a big university which I attend, a second school with about 5,000 students, and a technical college. So there's a lot of young people around me all the time. For context, I am a 5'11", slightly overweight female with broad shoulders, so people don't usually mess with me, but I do get the occasional creeper that says, "I'm a tall, cool glass of water," or "them legs," and other body parts, etc. I live only a few blocks away from campus, so it was not uncommon for me to walk to and from classes. However, one night I had met with a group for a class project after class, and we were later than I thought we would be, so I had to walk alone at around 10 PM in the dark. I was fine on campus, and about a block after leaving campus I got a gut feeling that something was wrong. I knew that somebody was following me, and The most part of the town was already shut down. There was a pizza place that was open, but I just went past it. I look ahead and there were two girls walking ahead with pizza, carrying it back to their apartment or whatever. I decided better be embarrassed rather than be a victim. I yelled, "Hey friends, wait up." Now these girls were total strangers and they turn around expecting to find a friend, or instead, there was just me running and flagging them down. And behind her, a guy in a hoodie who stopped walking. They both got gut feelings that something wasn't right and decided to play along. "Hey girl, on our way to Brandon's party, you wanna come with us?" I caught up with them and pretended I needed to get something out of my bag, and we stepped to the side and they were both giving me this freaked out look. At that moment, the hooded guy then passes us with this look of pure hatred and evil. His eyes burned into mine and he continued to walk. I ended up going to the party with my new friends. Later that night, we got a campus alert message that a student had been attacked a few blocks off campus, and the description actually matched the guy that was following me. We contacted the police and eventually the guy got caught. I still talk to those girls today, although we live in different parts of the country now. I'm sure glad that I never had to meet that man alone. My Paranoia Saved My Life by Jay Bry. So this all happened a while back while I was in my early 20s and I was working at a little retail store in my town's mall. It was coming up to the end of the half day and I don't know how I noticed it, but there was an older man, probably 50, I'm not sure. He had walked past my store maybe 3 or 4 times now, not consecutively either. It was just every now and then. Now, I worked in one of those little costume jewelry stores, so it was kind of odd for an older guy to be walking past it so many times, but I kinda didn't think anything of it. I don't even know how I picked up on it in the first place. It came to closing time and I had left to catch my bus about 6:30. I remembered it was transitioning into winter because it was dark out by then, and I'm a very paranoid person. I still live by the stranger danger rules, so even now, when I leave work, I make sure that I change to an outfit less fashionable. I really don't like to draw any attention to myself in any way possible. I really cover up as much as I possibly can to look average. Anyway, I was waiting at the bus stop for my bus home, sitting by myself at the two towns centre terminal. And guess who walks past? The older guy. At this point, I felt kind of uneasy, but in my head I tried to make as rational reasons as I could, and it was obvious that people have to get buses all the time. Of course they do. My bus showed up eventually, and well, we can all guess who got on after me. I remember sitting in the seats facing inwards, the ones for wheelchairs and prams, and he sat at the first seat above the steps. I remembered staring forward and I could literally feel his eyes burning holes into me. I kept on trying to use my peripheral vision to see if he was staring at me, but I didn't want him to notice what I was doing. The whole bus ride I have waited to see if he got off before my stop, thinking that I was just being over paranoid and anxious the whole time. Until I pressed my button for my stop, that is. I literally waited until the last possible second to press it. As I stood up, he did too. I went to walk to the front of the bus, and he exited the rear at that moment. I then waited for the second he stepped off and sat back down again. I have no idea where the bus went after my stop, honestly, I didn't care. Now, I will honestly never forget the look on his face for as long as I live as the bus drove off. I have never seen such hatred and anger in somebody's face before than I did at that moment through that window. His face burnt into my memory like a photograph. It still absolutely terrifies me to this day. I have no idea what would have happened to me to this day if I got off the bus stop at my stop that night. But I'm sure glad that my paranoia was so intense that I didn't. Hello everyone, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video then please give it a like and subscribe for my future content. If you have any suggestions for future videos then please leave them in the comments below for me, as well as any other suggestions for videos. Thank you again. Hello everyone. Sorry if my voice sounded a little bit croaky or kind of burnt at any points, because in some of it I know I sounded like I was a little bit unwell, but honestly I think that was just where I was so excited to get this new mic stand, it took too much out of me. But yeah, I might have been actually getting unwell and just avoided it again, so that's probably a really good thing. But yeah, sorry it took a little bit longer to get this video out. It's where I tried to do a very big and broad range of stories, and some that hopefully you haven't heard yet. It took a bit longer for me to be able to source and find them. But yeah, I'm really happy with how it come out, and I really hope you enjoy it. And yeah, I'm doing really good at the moment. I feel quite happy, and I'm a lot less anxious at the moment. And I'm probably going to be starting a second channel too soon, so I'll keep you all updated. But yeah, that's everything for now. So I hope you're all okay, and I'll update you again in the next video or in a separate video as an actual update one. Take care, everyone. Have a nice day.